You have your laptop or? Yeah. You have the easy one? Can you compare yourself to the I saw when I was before submitting them, and because you were just changed it, so that often. For this one, which is all the best to scratch it on the white over yourself. It's recommended white the first one. The minimum requirement there. Answer, this is item of the other. Then we get the answer.
Sure about that? We'll just email it to Sammy. Tell me what happened. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah. One row will be sufficient. All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So before we begin the class today, any questions from the quiz, the test? No? Okay, let's begin. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So today we're going to be starting with prayer. So we covered last week toilet manners, how to use the toilet. Hopefully everyone is practicing those things. The water and all of that thing. We talked about what kind of water you can use. On Thursday, it's predicted to be 104 degrees. So probably some people are going to be going to the beach. So can you use water from the sea to make wudu? Yes, you can. So everyone knows that now. Concessions about wiping over socks, wiping over a bandage when you're injured. We covered all of that. We covered the menstruation and lokia, which is very, very common questions that people have. So hopefully that gives some clarity on all of that. So let's begin with prayer today, inshallah ta'ala. So prayer is a specific form of worship which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually taught to us. What prayer does, it does a number of things. It brings a person closer to Allah. So that's one of the main parts of prayer. It brings you closer to Allah. And it also has the benefit of keeping you away from moral conduct. It keeps people away from having immoral, bad conduct, misbehaving, talking bad, using bad language. That's what prayer is supposed to do. It actually has these features that it can get you away from doing bad things. So if you're still doing all of these things and there's no change in your behavior, then there's something wrong in the prayer. Right? So it's not, this is what it's designed to do. Also, prayer purifies your sins. The way that we talked about purification purifies your sins as well. And prayer is something that should never be taken lightly. It's so important, it's such an essential part of Islam that it actually differentiates between a person who's taking Islam seriously and who's not taking Islam seriously. So prayers, the 5 daily prayers that we're talking about, should not be neglected by anyone. Unfortunately, the reality of the world situation is that the vast majority of Muslims in the world neglect their prayers today. This was not the situation in the past, right? There was many times in history where they did not neglect their prayers. And you find that when the Muslims did not neglect their prayers and they actually put emphasis on their prayers, you saw that their situation in the world and in their own lives, in their families, everything was very different than what it is today. So perhaps the prayer is tied to the success of a Muslim, not only in the next life, but in this life as well. So we should take our prayers very, very seriously. And in the beginning, it's a struggle. It takes time to get used to it. It takes time to wake up. Most people can hit up 4 prayers at least. No one really has much of excuse for the 4 prayers. The biggest one is the Fajr prayer that people find to be very difficult. And the difficulty is just overcoming your desire for sleeping and being able to control yourself when you go to sleep early. That's really all it is. So it's something that's very within the means of everyone to actually accomplish. Even someone who doesn't completely understand and fulfill all the meaning and everything of the prayer perfectly, you say, well, I'm not going to do it because my prayer is not perfect. Well, you still get benefit by taking time out of your day to go and stand in front of Allah, and you're standing in front of your Creator. So there is still benefit even if you don't master the prayer 100%, even if you're doing it half or you're doing 20%. There is still a lot of benefit in that. Even if someone just performs the actions and their mind is absent and all of that. Now, you should never be content with that, but there's still benefit in that. And what's the benefit in that? Is that the fact that you took time out of your schedule, you took time out of your life to turn off the TV, to say, to the people at work, I'm going to come back in 10 minutes or something. You took time out for Allah, that's still something big. Right? And the fact that you actually did the motions, at least, you could have cheated and, prayed 1 unit of prayer instead of 2. But you didn't because you know Allah is watching. So even if it's the bare minimum prayer, there is still some benefit in there. So no one should think that, oh, well, there's no point in doing this, I'm not focusing and I'm not doing this. There is still a great amount of benefit in there. And of course, it should be eventually made a lot better. So that's the introduction to prayer. We're going to be obviously covering the legal aspect of prayer. These are just some of the benefits and the importance of prayer. But we're going to be covering the way that you actually perform the prayer. Right? And then there's other spiritual dimensions to the prayer, which are covered in different classes. So the 5 daily prayers are the first and the most important prayers that we're going to learn. They're the most important prayers because we do them on a regular basis, and they're prescribed for us to do. They're mandatory. Okay? And what do? They refresh a person's belief. Every time you pray, 5 times a day, it kind of refreshes your belief. It reminds you what your purpose in life is. It reminds you why you've been created by Allah in the first place. And also, the reason why these prayers are spread throughout the day, why not just all the prayers in one part of the day? Or why not just pray all 35 prayers in one day and then you're done for the rest of the week? They're spread out throughout the day so that you keep a balance between this world and the next world. You keep a balance between your own material life and your own pleasures and your servitude to Allah. So it helps you get that balance so that you don't get caught up in materialism, you don't get caught up in your daily work or play or something like that. You take time out to dedicate yourself to Allah. So that's very important, and it's a really big blessing for us because it keeps people in check, and people need to be kept in check. Right? So these are the 5 daily prayers. So who needs to pray? Who's actually required to pray? Well, obviously it's Muslims. Every Muslim is required to pray as long as they meet these 2 conditions. Condition number 1 is maturity. Okay, once they reach the age of maturity, then they're going to be held responsible for their actions. Before a person reaches the age of maturity, they're not responsible for their actions. So what is maturity? Maturity basically means that your intellect has developed to a level where you are cognizant and you're able to understand things such that you're going to be held accountable in the sight of Allah. That's what maturity means. But the reality is, nobody can tell. People mature at different times in their life. So how can you tell who is mature and who is not mature? In reality, you can never know 100%. Because you can look at one person, they look very mature, or they're physically, they look mature, but they're not. Or you can see another person, they look like very small, but actually they're very mature. So there's a difference between people. So what you need is, from a legal perspective, from looking at, what advice do you give to people? Islamic law has set certain guidelines. Now the guidelines should be taken into consideration, but at the same time Allah knows exactly when a person reaches the age of maturity, and He doesn't. But we act upon the external, because that's what law is. Law is the external. So according to Islamic law, the criteria is that someone reaches the age of puberty. So maturity is when a person reaches the age of puberty. Now what is puberty as defined in Islamic law? Well, a boy is considered to be a mature adult once they either have their first wet dream or equivalent, which means that they're getting prepared for, their body is prepared for sexual activity. So if they have a wet dream, or if somehow if they, something else comes out, which is like semen or something, it means that their body is getting ready for maturity. They're considered mature, and they're going to be treated as a mature person from that time, from that point in time. In terms of the prayer, is going to be a requirement for them. Fasting, they're going to be, if they commit a crime, if they go and kill someone, if they shoot someone, they're going to be tried and held like an adult according to Islamic law when that time comes. For a girl, it's similar, is that when she sees her first wet dream or equivalent, or if she begins her menstrual period, she's considered to be a mature person at that time, or someone who's reached the age of puberty. So she's going to be held responsible from that period of time. If neither of these, no menstruation, no wet dream, no equivalent, occurs before the age of 15, then by the age of 15, the person is going to be considered mature already. So usually menstruation, wet dreams, those kind of things, they happen different people to different people in different cultures, depending on their climate, depending on other factors in their life and all of that. So it varies. It can be between the age of 9 and 11 and 12 and 13, 15. Sometimes it goes over 15. So if it goes over 15, then that person is considered to be mature in the sight of the law, meaning Islamic law, at the age of 15, if they've not had one of these things earlier. So usually people mature earlier, maybe 12, maybe 13, maybe 11. But if they don't hit that by the age of 15, then at the age of 15 they're considered mature, they're going to be held accountable. Now keep in mind, the age of 15 is defined in Islamic terms as lunar years. So 15 lunar years. So there's a difference between a solar year, or the Gregorian calendar, and the Muslim calendar. So the Gregorian calendar has how many days in a year? 365. I hope you knew that. All right. So now the Islamic calendar, I don't expect you to know how many days in a year are there in the Islamic calendar. 354. So we're talking about a difference of 11 days. 11 days times 15 years, we're talking about 6 months approximately. So technically, people will hit the age of maturity if they don't have one of these things. At what age? 14 and a half. So 14 and a half. So that's the key to the thing to keep in mind. Okay. Imam Abu Hanifa, by the way, one of the other scholars, he said the age was 18. Okay, so there's some difference of opinion here, but the majority say 15. All right, so what does that mean? That means that children need to start praying once they hit that age of maturity. But does that mean that we wait until they start praying at that point in time? No. You should actually teach children how to pray by the age of 7. And this is according to the Prophet. By the age of 7. Right? Now, is that 7 lunar years or 7 solar years? 7 lunar years. So is that less than 7 or greater than 7? It's actually less than the age of 7. So we're talking about 6 and some amount of months, a little bit under the age of 7. That's when you're supposed to get them to start praying. That's when you teach them to start praying and get them into the habit and explaining to them, this is what prayer is about. And this is the time where they're not doing all 5 prayers. This is the time where you're kind of teaching them, look, stand next to me, stand, put your hands up and just follow what I'm doing and all of that. Year 7, year 8, you can start explaining to them, look, this is the Fatiha. If they haven't already memorized it, if they haven't already memorized the Quran by the age of 7, like standard Egyptian practice is memorized by the age of, standard Indian, Pakistani practice for those who are really into this, finish memorizing by the age of 7. It's very, very common. In Egypt, in Pakistan, in India, and all these places. So if they haven't memorized the Fatiha yet, for some reason, this is the time to get them to memorize it, get them to understand it, understand what they're saying and all of that, maybe learn some of the other parts of prayer. By the age of 9, they probably got the entire prayer down. They understand what they're saying. They know what to do and all that. By the age of 10, they've already had 3 years now. By the age of 10, now you make them pray. It's your responsibility as a parent to make them pray at the age of 10, and this is what the Prophet said. So now they're praying 5 prayers by the time they hit the age of 10. And this is the requirement. This is what parents are responsible for. Okay, so this is not to put anyone down, but the reality is, how many Muslims actually went through this process, which is part of Islam? How many of you actually went through the process, age of 7 to 10, started that? MashaAllah. 1. Alhamdulillah. That's a blessing. That's a blessing. But most didn't. Which means what? Which means you learn from the mistakes, you learn from this, you make sure your children are going to be following the formula in Islam. Right? So you take it very, very seriously. And then you don't have to worry about, well, you know what? I tried to make them start praying and he's 15 and he doesn't want to pray. Of course he doesn't want to pray because you never taught him anything, and now he's had exposure to all these other things, or she's had exposure to so many things. They're already a full cup. And you have to empty that cup before you can actually put something else in there. So you have to be very cautious about that. So that's maturity. Okay. Then the second criteria is sanity. So when they have full sanity, that's when you can have intellectual maturity. If someone has a defect or an illness such that their intellect is impaired in a significant way, then they're not going to be considered responsible adults. And they're not, in the sense, they're going to be treated like children because their mind functions like a child. So therefore, they're not going to be held accountable for certain things. If they drop something or something, if they break something, they're not held accountable in the same way. Likewise, when it comes to prayer, they're not going to be held accountable in front of Allah the same way that a responsible adult is going to be held accountable. Right? So because that's one of the things that that they've been tested with. So if someone has that, then they're not responsible. They don't have to pray, right? But of course, you should encourage them to pray anyways. You should try and teach them, just like children, teach them what it is, let them pray a few times and all of that. So you put them in the category of kind of like somewhere between 7 and 10, and allow them to pray and all of that, encourage them, but they're not required to pray. Now, what does that mean? That means that any Muslim who's reached the age of maturity and who has sanity, right, who doesn't have a defect in their intellect, is required to pray all 5 times a day. It's not an optional thing. It's not something that we do in our own convenience when we feel like it. It's a requirement, and it's something that we actually need. So those are the people who actually need to pray. Now, when are the prayers? When do the prayers actually take place, and when is the time to perform the prayers? Well, the timings are fixed. So there's fixed timings for the prayers, and they're spread throughout the day so that you're constantly remembering Allah throughout the day at different times. Now, all the prayer timings are dependent on the position of the sun. And the reason why they're dependent on the position of the sun is because it's one of the easiest things to tell time when you don't have watches and you don't have computers and all of that. It's one of the easiest ways to figure out when the right time would be. So therefore, if it's dependent on the position of the sun, and has nothing to do with the sun itself, but it's dependent on telling what the environment is, what the timing is, then it's going to change every single day, and it's going to change based on the season. So you have to know the way that it, you have to figure out how to calculate it and all of these things. So remember that each prayer has a period of time, and it lasts a certain amount of time, so it actually makes life easy for you. So you don't have to pray exactly at that moment, but you could pray anywhere in that prayer time period. In case you're preoccupied, in case you're busy with something, you can actually go and pray anytime within that time period, that time frame. So that makes life a lot easier. So what is the essence of the prayer times? Most people don't know. Most people know their calculators and their prayer calendars and all that, which is good. But it's also good to know where it came from. How did Muslims in the past used to actually calculate their prayers? So we got 5 prayers. The first prayer is the Fajr prayer. It's known as the dawn prayer. And it consists of 2 units, which we'll talk about. And the timing of this prayer, it begins from the appearance of dawn, and it lasts until the beginning of sunrise. So what is the appearance of dawn? What is the definition of dawn? Who knows what it is? Yeah. So if you look out in the horizon, the horizon is basically, if you could look outside and there was no obstruction in your way. There's no mountain, there's no building, there's nothing. And you could see all the way straight forward in the horizon. You could see like the edge of the farthest you can see. When you see the darkness in the night, and all of a sudden in the horizon you see this white thread of light, just a little tiny line going across the horizon. When you're looking at it, that is what is called dawn. It's called breaking of dawn, right? So Americans didn't even know what this meant until the movie recently came out, so they didn't know anything. So now the dawn is actually when that white thread of light just starts coming out. That's called the dawn is breaking, right? Meaning that the darkness now has a little bit of light. That's when the beginning time for Fajr actually starts. That time lasts until sunrise. Now what is the definition of sunrise? Like right before sunrise. If you hit sunrise, it's already too late. Fajr time is over. So what is the actual definition of sunrise? Right? It's very similar. You look out in the horizon, like let's say you're in the desert or somewhere, there's no obstruction. You look out in the horizon, and brightness is already coming. That's because the sun, is appearing, that it's coming up about the horizon which you're looking at. So there's land, and then there's the sky that you're seeing. As soon as the disk of the sun just goes above the horizon so that you can actually see the little tiny disk of the sun creeping up, that's called sunrise. The sun has risen the moment you can actually see a little tiny bit of the sun in the horizon. That's the definition of sunrise. So until that little disk goes above, right when it's below, you still have time for Fajr. And this is a very common misconception among Muslims. They say that, what, I missed Fajr, there's too much light out there. Okay, when the sun is getting near the horizon, there's a lot of light actually. A lot of light is there because the sun's light still penetrates through the Earth's atmosphere. But even though you have not seen the actual sun rise, the disk has not come up yet. So the time for Fajr is still valid until that sunrise begins. So these are the timings for the Fajr prayer, from dawn until sunrise. Okay. The second prayer is the Zuhr prayer, what's known as the midday prayer. And it consists of 4 units, and it begins after noon. Okay, now what is noon? Noon is not 12 p.m. Okay, noon in the Islamic terminology is real noon. Real noon, basically what they used to call, in the Wild West and all that, high noon. We'll meet you at high noon with the guns and all that. So it's very typical. High noon is when the sun is directly above you. That's the definition of noon. Now 12 p.m. is not always the case that way. So noon means high noon when the sun is directly above the location that you are actually in. So that's when the time begins, right after the noon, right after the sun passes that area. So to define it, let's see. It's not defined here. There's no need to define it. When the sun basically begins to decline. So what's happening is that the sun is rising, right? It's going up, going up, going up. Once it hits noon, it starts declining and going down, right? It starts setting. It's very, very slowly. So once it crosses the noon barrier, that's when the time for Zuhr actually begins, right afterwards. Okay, that's the beginning time, and it lasts until an object equals its shadow. So let me explain what that means. So you take, it explains here. Okay, this is how you figure out how noon is. Very easy way to figure out how noon is. You could do an experiment if you want. You take a simple stick, you go outside, and you watch around the time when noon is going to be coming, and you watch the shadow of that stick. And what's going to happen is the shadow is going to be, let's say, long. As you get closer and closer to noon, what's going to happen to the shadow? It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. As soon as you see that it's gotten to its smallest point, and then it starts getting longer again, that's when you know you had hit noon, at that part where it's not getting any shorter. That's the definition of noon, at that moment. Right? So that's how you figure it out. Now you say, well, wait a minute. If the sun is directly overhead, then there shouldn't be any shadow. Right? But that's not true, because it depends on your location. So the curvature of the earth does not mean that there's going to be zero shadow always, depending on where your location is. There may be some places like that, maybe near the equator or something, but not always. So it's where the shadow actually stops. And it lasts until an object is equal to its own shadow. So what that means is that you take that same stick and you're watching the stick, right? And the stick is actually equal to the shadow of the stick. They become equal. That's what the original time would be. But there's one little problem. And the problem is that if you're in a region where when you're at noontime, there's still some shadow. There's not zero shadow. There's still some shadow. So what do you have to do? You have to add that. Exactly. So you add that. So you check the length of the object. You add that amount. Check the length of the object. And then you determine that's going to be the time. So you have to remove that from the equation as well. Okay. So that's how you figure out when the time of the Zuhr prayer ends. Okay. So you subtract it actually, right? Minus its shadow at noontime. The Asr prayer is 4 units. It begins when the time for Zuhr ends. So if I was going to ask you, like in a test question, when does the time for Asr begin? You can't just say when Zuhr ends. I'm giving you the easy way. You would have to say when an object equals its shadow minus the shadow at noon. That's the actual definition. Okay, and it lasts until sunset. It lasts until the sun sets. Now, what is the definition of sunset? You're looking in the horizon, you see the sun going down, 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 down. So is it when the first part of the sun goes below the horizon, or is it when the last part of the sun goes below the horizon? The last part, right? So the sun is completely gone from view, and now you look in the horizon, you can't see the sun anymore. You just see some light there, but you can't see the tip of the sun. That's known as sunset. Has anyone ever gone into the beach or something and actually watched the sunset? Okay, good. So those who are not married, you need to do this before you get married. It's a very romantic thing or something like that. So anyways, so it's very common for people to go and watch the sunset. So that's when the time for Asr ends. And that's when the time for Maghrib begins. Right when that time comes in. So Maghrib is 3 units. When Asr ends, that's when the time begins. And it lasts until the whiteness in the sky, after that reddish glow goes away, disappears, and the darkness starts spreading in the horizon. So what that means is basically, look, you're looking out there. When the sun sets, Maghrib time has come in. It's going to be pretty bright still. It's getting darker, darker, but it's going to be a little bit bright. When you look out into the sky, what you're going to see is that the daytime starts turning into like this reddish glow in the sky. After the reddish glow, you see like red in the sky, it's going to start changing into like this white glow. Once the white glow starts going away, what's it going to change into? Just darkness. Exactly. So when that white glow in the sky goes away, that's when the time for Maghrib is finished. And it's probably an easy thing to determine. You don't need to really look much in the horizon either. You can just kind of see in the sky, is that whiteness kind of gone or it's not? So when it's still there, you still got some time for Maghrib. When it's not, and there's darkness now has spread about and there's no more like whiteness in the sky, that's when you know that the time for Maghrib is over. Okay, so that's the timing for Maghrib. Some scholars have said it's the reddish glow instead of the white glow, which ends the time and starts the time for the next prayer. Okay, so just understand that. So that's the time for Maghrib. Then we have the Isha prayer, which is the night prayer. It consists of 4 units, and it begins when Maghrib ends, and it lasts until the beginning of Fajr. So what was the beginning of Fajr? Not sunrise. Dawn. Right, dawn. It's very important to differentiate between dawn and sunrise. So dawn. So any time before dawn, you still have time for the Isha prayer. Okay. Now, there are a bunch of programs that actually calculate the exact times for prayer based on your location. So it's recommended to use these programs. There's no like added benefit. You get more reward if you like go and you have your stick in your backpack, you know, and you're measuring or something like that. There's no extra reward for that. Use the programs, use the calculations. There's nothing wrong with that. But just note, if you have it on your phone, there are phone apps you can download on your smartphone. If you have a smartwatch, you can download, you know, a thing on your watch. You can print them out from the internet. You can get them from your local, you know, masjid, your local mosque or something like that. So you should get those prayer times, and you can get them way in advance. You can get them in advance for 20 years, and they're already been calculated. So you can just use that timing, and you know, makes your life a lot easier. But just note some things, that there are some differences in the ways and the methods of calculation. Like I mentioned, a few differences here and there. So there's a few differences, particularly for the Fajr prayer and for the Isha prayer. The way that is calculated is different because of the scientific method has a little bit difference of opinion as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's not a major thing. The best thing is you follow your local Muslim community. You follow your local Muslim community in terms of what to do, and that's going to be the best thing for you. All right, so if you follow our community here, recently we've actually done some tests with our CIS students actually last year. They actually went out into the desert and they checked the calculation, they checked what degrees are going to be correct and all that. So for summertime, we're actually going with 15 degrees instead of the 18 degrees in this region. Now the timings change, the seasons change for winter and all that. We couldn't get anyone to go out in the winter, but we did go out in the summer around the same time right now. So we've already checked it. The 15 degree for the Isha prayer and for the Fajr prayer has been something which is agreed upon. Okay, so that's the prayer timings. Now it's recommended that you don't delay your prayer time. You don't delay your prayers without some reason. So whenever you get a chance, you should always try to pray at the beginning of the time. And it's very common for people to just procrastinate, and they end up delaying their prayers, you know, for late. So it's better to always pray at the beginning of time, not so that you're getting it out of the way, because that's not what prayer should be, but so that, alhamdulillah, you don't have to worry about, you know, getting late or something like that. So it's always recommended, but there are some times where it's better to actually delay the prayer, and that's when there's a community benefit involved in delaying the prayer. So here are the times where you should be delaying or not delaying the prayer. Here's some recommended rules. The general rule is you pray it in the beginning of time. But if it comes for Fajr prayer and you're praying in a group, then it's actually recommended to delay the prayer a little bit so that more people will be able to come. So it's easier for them to attend. Because Fajr is one of the it's an early prayer. It's difficult for people. So it's recommended to delay a little bit so that more people will be able to come to the congregation. They'll be praying together in a group. Otherwise, you're going to have less people at the beginning of time, right? So that's usually the way that it works, except sometimes it works the other way around. So if people live in a big city and they need to go to work and there's a lot of traffic, then they actually prefer the earlier time because they got to jump on the freeway immediately afterwards. So if you delay the prayer, like 6 a.m., you find there's less people than when the prayer is at 5:30 a.m. because they got to go to work. So you have to do it's recommended to do what will cause more people to attend the prayer inside the mosque. Number 2, if you have a very warm climate, very hot area, it's recommended to delay the Zuhr prayer in the summertime. Why? Because it's so hot, and if people are, let's say people are walking, most people drive now, but even if they're driving, it's really, really hot. If they park their cars outside, it's boiling hot. So it's recommended to delay it a little bit till the end, maybe later on in the time, so it's a little bit cooler. It's not so burning hot like at noontime. So it's recommended for that. The Asr prayer is recommended to not delay it until the end of time. So you can pray anytime, but it's really, really emphasized, do not delay your Asr prayer until like the last half an hour when the sun starts going down. Because that's considered to be, the Asr prayer is a really important prayer, which many people miss because they're at work, they're busy, they're doing things, and they end up just neglecting this prayer. So it's very important, and this prayer has been mentioned in the Quran specifically, that don't mess with this prayer, don't neglect this prayer. It's easy to neglect it. The Maghrib prayer should always be prayed at the beginning of its time. It's recommended. Always recommended to be as early as you possibly can. And the Isha prayer should not be delayed past midnight. So it's allowed, but it's not recommended. It's recommended to not delay past midnight. And what does midnight actually mean? Midnight doesn't mean 12 p.m., right? Midnight means you calculate from sunset, right, until dawn, right, or sunrise or dawn or something like that. And what you do is you take in between the middle time between that, which usually is around midnight, right? It happens to be around 12 p.m., but not exactly the case. So midnight, do not delay past midnight, and you should not go to sleep before praying the Isha prayer. So even if the time has come in and you think, you know what, I'm going to sleep 2 hours and I'm going to wake up at 11:30 p.m. and I'll still make it before midnight, it's not recommended, just in case you keep on sleeping, because it's sleeping time, right? And it's a very common practice, unfortunately, in the Muslim world, that especially when there's a party, there's a social gathering, there's a wedding or something, everyone ends up delaying their prayer past midnight, and they shouldn't do that. So they should just simply pray at the venue that they're at. Just take out 5 or 10 minutes, pray right there, and then you go home and you pray, whatever else is later, you keep on celebrating. So it's we should change this habit. So now that you're CIS students and now that you know, don't delay after midnight, we make this cultural change within the Muslim community, and we don't delay our prayers, especially not past midnight. So these are the recommended timings that are there. Moving on to the prerequisites. Okay, so there are certain prerequisites that are needed before prayer. So before you actually start praying, if you don't have these prerequisites, your prayer will not count. Very similar to what we discussed in wudu. There's certain things that you need to have in wudu. If you don't have these things, your wudu is not going to count. Likewise for the prayer. So the number one thing is being in a state of purity by performing wudu or performing ghusl or something like that. The whole point of the last chapter was mainly to get you prepared to meet the prerequisites of being able to pray. So it's just repeating what this is. This is basically was the subject of the entire last chapter. So you make sure that you're in a state of purity, right? Check all of that. Then the second condition is that you make sure your clothes, your body, and your place of prayer is free from impurities. And we covered that in the last chapter as well, right? Now, when it says your clothes, your body, and your place of prayer, the place of prayer refers to the place where your body will actually touch. So where will your body actually touch? So your hands are going to be touching the floor. Your forehead is going to be touching part of the ground, right? Your nose is going to be touching part of the ground. Your knees are going to be on the ground. But let's say right below your chin, for example, it's not going to be touching part of the ground. Let's say there was some impurity right there underneath your, underneath your chest or something like that. You're not going to be touching that part of the ground. So it's recommended not to have it anyways on your prayer place. But since it's not touching, it's not a prerequisite. Okay, so it just has to be clean to that extent. Okay, so you make sure that, you're not going to be praying near a garbage dump or something like that. So once all of that is clean, there are a few more requirements. The other requirements are your body should be covered has to be covered properly, even if you're alone. This is very important. It's even if you're alone. It doesn't matter if you're praying among other people or not. Even if you're alone by yourself, you can't pray in your underwear or something like that. And I'm going to explain to you why. Okay, so how you know that? So you have to be covered. A male must cover what is between the navel and the knees. Okay, between the belly button, the navel, up until the knees should be covered. Has to be covered. So does the navel actually have to be covered? Do the knees actually have to be covered? There's a difference of opinion among scholars on whether this can be open or this can be open just a little bit, like right above the knees or right below the knees, right above the navel or right below the navel. What I recommend to people is, if there's no real difficulty, just try to cover it all the time. It's the best thing. Just put on a shirt or put your, put on your boarding shorts or whatever it is. Make sure that everything is covered properly. And obviously be careful. People who play basketball and stuff, this is a problem for them because they pull down their shorts, and then what they end up doing is this is throughout the prayer, so they end up going in bowing position and all of that, and all of a sudden the shirt is too short, and then something else gets revealed. So you have to be covering all of this at this part of time throughout the prayer. If a small area is uncovered during the prayer time of this area, you just recover it. So let's say, your knees are supposed to be covered, and so all of a sudden a little bit gets uncovered for a moment, you recover it again. Okay, likewise for a female, which we're going to talk about, you just simply recover it again. For if there's a large area that is uncovered, then you need to repeat the prayer. So like let's look at the female example. So a woman must cover her entire body except the face, the hands, and the feet. So these are the 3 parts that don't have to be covered. Now let's say she's in the middle of prayer and little bit hair starts coming out, and the hijab was not tied correctly, so she can recover that part again and she's going to be fine. If a large portion gets uncovered, all of a sudden the hijab slips off, right? You have to repeat the prayer. Likewise for the man. All of a sudden his knees become exposed all the way up to his thigh, he has to go and repeat the prayer. And this is a very problem for the guys. You see guys that have the really tight clothing nowadays. A lot of people, and I've actually had sisters come up to me and complain, and this should not be happening, right? Sisters coming up to me and saying, we can actually see the crack of the brother from behind when he's going into prostration. This should not be happening, right? Because that means, so if your private part gets revealed to that extent, you got to repeat the prayer again, because that's a law. That's a very essential part to keep covered. So make sure you either tuck in your shirt, or you wear a longer shirt, or you pull up your pants, or you do something so that that's not happening. So that's the part that needs to be covered. So you need to make sure your body is covered properly. Requirement of prayer. Okay. The next requirement of prayer is that you have to face the qibla, face the direction of prayer. The direction of prayer, which is Mecca, right? Wherever you are, that's known as the qibla. So the direction of Mecca is known as the qibla. With your chest at minimum. Your chest has to be facing the qibla at all times throughout the prayer. So if all of a sudden you sneeze, right? You have to sneeze and you go, and you keep your chest towards the qibla and you move your head this way, your prayer is still fine. If you sneeze and you turn your chest away completely from the qibla, you have to repeat your prayer and start all over, because this is a prerequisite, it's a requirement of the prayer. So make sure that that's the bare minimum. So your chest is at least facing the qibla. Now how do you figure out the qibla? You can use a compass to figure it out. What is the degrees here in Southern California? 15 about 15 degrees, which is north-northeast. Not just northeast, but north-northeast. Okay. You can use a compass. You can use one of those calculators. You can use one of the apps to figure out exactly where it is. Or you can, if you're really slick and you know your astronomy, you can calculate based on the direction of the sun, or the position of the sun, or the North Star, or whatever way you calculate, doesn't make a difference. What if you cannot figure out what direction to pray? And you're around and you don't have the app with you, you don't have a compass with you, and how do you figure out the direction? So what you do is you're supposed to estimate. So either you estimate, you try and figure it out, or you ask someone. So if you ask someone, just one more. If you ask someone, hopefully they're going to give you the right information if they know, right? So if they tell you this is what it is, just you go ahead and you follow it. If there's no one to ask, nobody knows, everyone you ask, they have no idea, which is very common. If you go around asking like 10 people, not a single person knows what direction is where. It's very common in today's society. Then you try and figure out some way. So you look at like the freeway, right? You say, well, that's a 91 freeway. That way is going west. That way is going east. So that must be north. So north-northeast is approximately like around there. You try and figure it out somehow, the closest you can get. There's always a way to kind of figure it out. And you go ahead and you pray in that direction that you kind of tried your best to figure out. Right? And or you look at the sun, or you check the time and you say, well, based on the time, the sun should be in this location. You use something to try and figure it out. And if you discover that you were wrong, after the prayer is over, you don't need to repeat your prayer. Even if you were completely wrong, you were 180 degrees off, you totally missed the whole thing, you still don't need to repeat your prayer as long as you put some effort into it. If you put no effort into it, then you should go and repeat your prayer. So if you're in the middle of prayer and then you realize that you're wrong, somehow it dawns on you, you know what, the 91 freeway goes opposite way east, I'm in the wrong direction. You turn around in the middle of prayer. Right? If someone comes and notifies you that, you know what, your direction is wrong and you can hear that what they're saying, you just move. If you see someone praying in the wrong direction and you know that they're praying in the wrong direction, you just take them by the shoulders and you readjust them a little bit. So now you know if someone's grabbing you and they're adjusting you, they're not trying to mess with you while you're in the middle of prayer. They're trying to readjust you. So don't get alarmed, don't get frightened. Don't turn around and say, what the heck are you doing? Because you just lost your prayer because you talked, number one, and number two, your chest went away from the qibla. Right? So you understand someone's trying to redirect you. If you're not able to face the qibla, for some reason, there's some danger involved. You have an illness, you're lying on a hospital bed and you can't move and it's very, very difficult, they can't move the bed for you or something. Or there's no space for you to move around, you're on an airplane and you can't face the qibla in that direction because there's no way. And if you try and go in the back where the waiters and waitresses are and all of that, you try and pray over there, you're probably gonna get boarded by the U.S. Air Force or something, and they're gonna land the plane and say this guy was planning something or whatever it is. So what you can do is you don't have to face the qibla in that instance, and you can pray in whatever direction that you can get closest to the qibla. Just pray in whatever direction you're able to pray in. All right. So that's when it comes to the direction. You wanted to correct something? Yeah, I know it's not 15 degrees. Yeah, it's close to 15 degrees. 30, 23. Is it 23? I thought it was around 19 or something like that. No. Did we say 23? Okay, yeah, 23. So yeah, okay, so 45 degrees would be northeast. So yeah, it's north-northeast. It's in between 0 and 45. So 23 sounds about right. That's where it should be. All right. So you can check on your app. They tell you the degrees and everything. So that's a requirement. Make sure you face the qibla, or you try your best if you can. And if you can't, then you don't have to worry about it. Make sure that the time for prayer you're about to perform has entered. So you got to check to see if the time is entered. So what's going to happen is if you don't check the time and you start praying, and all of a sudden after you're done, you look at the time and all of a sudden your watch starts beeping. The time for Zohar just came in. You got to repeat your prayer because you didn't check. You should check and make sure that the time is actually correct and it's come in. So these are the requirements before prayer that need to be done before you actually engage and start your prayer. And these are mandatory, and they should be maintained throughout the prayer. So for example, purity is one of the requirements. If you lose purity by passing gas or something like that, then your prayer is going to be invalid. Facing the qibla is one of the requirements. If all of a sudden you are not facing the qibla anymore, your prayer is going to be invalid. Making sure your body is covered, same thing. If it's all of a sudden it's not uncovered anymore for an extended period of time or a major part of it, then your prayer has to be repeated. You start again. All right, so that's the prerequisites. Now how do we pray? Now how do we actually perform the prayer? So I'm going to assume that most people kind of know a little bit about the prayer. And if you don't, this kind of gives you the details of the prayer. If you're starting out in the beginning, you've never prayed before or something like that, I recommend there's another book. It's called How to Pray, a step-by-step guide for new Muslims. Okay, really cool author, his name is Mustafa Omar. All right, check out the book. It helps you to kind of gradually ease your way into the prayer. If you've already done a little bit of prayer, then this will be kind of, a lot of this is review, but it kind of fills in some of the gaps that you might not have known. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So this is how the prayers are going to be performed. Each prayer has a number of units or cycles, what they call rak'ah. And you're basically repeating a lot of what you do in each and every single cycle, each and every single unit. And there are three main types of prayer among the 5 daily prayers. There's a 2-unit prayer, there's a 3-unit prayer, and there's a 4-unit prayer. Okay, so let's start by looking at how you perform a 2-unit prayer to kind of give you the foundation, and then we can build off the other prayers from this one. So the first thing you're going to do when you're starting to pray, after you've met all the prerequisites and everything, you check a place, you find a place that you're not going to be disturbed. Right? You make sure that you're going to be in a good place for prayer. And it's recommended that you actually mark your place, either with like a large object like a backpack or a chair or something like that, or you draw a line where you're going to be praying in terms of the edge of where you're going to be prostrating, and you mark that location off so that no one's going to be walking in front of you or crossing in front of you. They understand, whether they understand or they don't understand, you're marking your own location so that no one bothers you, at least where you are. If you're praying on a carpet, then the edge of that carpet is going to be the barrier. Like, you know those prayer carpets you pray on? The edge of the carpet is considered the barrier for you already. It's the marking for you. So you don't need to place like another chair in front of you. Some people do that, but you don't have to. If you're praying in the mosque or something like that, the line that's built into the carpet is considered to be a barrier for you as well. So you've done your job. All right. Now, people walking in front of you, that's another issue. But your job, your responsibility has been done. Right? So you mark your own line. You get like a kind of a barrier there, so no one walks directly in front of your prayer area where you're going to be praying. So once you've done that, and that's recommended, once you've done that, you make the intention, what's known as the niyyah. Okay? The intention for prayer is done immediately before you start praying. So what you do is you stand there, and all you need to do for the intention is that you're conscious, you understand you're going into prayer, and you know which prayer you're praying. You got to make sure your intention is correct. If you have the wrong intention and you start the prayer, and then when you finish, right, all of a sudden, or you start changing the intention or something, you're in the middle of prayer, you thought you're praying, you thought you're praying Maghrib and you're actually praying Isha, or vice versa. You have to have the correct intention in terms of what prayer you're actually praying. All you got to do is focus your thoughts. You don't have to actually say anything. If you want to say something, you can go ahead and say that. Some people make that, they say, I want to say, I'm entering into prayer, Maghrib prayer, I'm going to be performing 3 units of prayer, and then they want to start. You can do that in your mind, you could do that whispering, but you don't have to. As long as it's in your mind, it's clear what you're doing, that's your intention. So what you do is you start by standing, what's known as qiyam. You start by standing up straight, your hands are to your sides, right? And your feet should be pointing forward. Right? So you make sure your feet are actually forward, they're not sideways or something like that. Probably not too comfortable in any ways. And then you make sure your feet are spread apart at least 1 hand span. So 1 hand span, if you were to put your hand between your feet, you want to make sure that your feet are at least a little bit spread out. They're not joined together. Okay, and the Prophet told us not to do that. And then you want to make sure that your feet are no more than shoulder width apart. Okay, so you should not be more than your shoulder width apart. The problem with that is if you are, and you become more than shoulder width apart, now you're not, if you're praying in a group, you're not going to be standing next to the person, because there's going to be a gap between your shoulders. So you should only stand shoulder width apart. This is a big problem in the Muslim community, and it's based on a misconception that some people have. We can comment on that some other day, but be careful of that. So it's minimum, about this much gap, maximum, shoulder width. Don't exceed it, and don't go feet together. Your eyes should be focused on the ground where you're actually going to be prostrating. So your eyes, when you're about to start, you're actually looking at the ground. So you're not looking up like this. You're not staring at the sky or something like that. You make sure that you're looking at the place where you're going to be prostrating. Now, throughout the prayer, you can actually close your eyes at any time for the sake of concentration. So if you want to close your eyes, you can do that as well. But keep your head in the right direction. Don't move your head like here and say, well, my eyes were closed. Don't keep don't move around or something like that. What does this stance represent? So once you're like this, you're about to start the prayer, you're standing properly, you're looking, your head is about a little bit down and everything, you're about to start your prayer. This represents a person who's at full attention. Right? This is not the laid back, loose, casual, stance. This is someone who's actually ready to get into something serious. So this is what the stance represents right before you start the prayer. And you begin the prayer by raising your hands, what's known as raf'a yadayn. So you raise your hands up, right? like this. And what happens, you make sure your palms are facing forward. It's very common for people to put their palms inward or something like that. Your palms should be facing forward. Okay. What does this signify? It signifies that when you actually raise your hands like this, scholars have commented on the wisdom, you're doing two things. Number one is you can imagine like all the thoughts that are distracting you in your mind and everything, you're kind of putting them all out. Just let them all go back, let everything out. And the second thing you're doing is, what does this look like? You know when someone points a gun at you? I surrender, right? Exactly. You're surrendering yourself in front of Allah. So you're putting your hands up, you're surrendering. I'm surrendering myself to you. This is what my prayer is representing, my obedience and my surrender to the Lord of the worlds, right? So you're leaving because you're leaving your desires for what Allah commanded you to do. Otherwise you could go be eating ice cream or something, but you went and you started praying. So this represents that. So while you're raising your hands, okay, or right before you raise your hands, or right after you raise your hands, you say the takbir, it's known as the glorification of Allah, which is Allahu Akbar. So you can say Allahu Akbar, then raise your hands. While you're raising your hands, Allahu Akbar. Or you could raise your hands and then say Allahu Akbar and come back. So this means Allah is the greatest. This is the definition. It means Allah is the greatest, and that's when you've begun your prayer. Now you're in prayer actually. This is the time where you make sure you don't violate any of those conditions for prayer. So you start the prayer by you're standing, right? What's known as standing for recitation, the qira'ah which you're going to be reciting. What you do is you start saying Allahu Akbar, and then you lower your hands down, and you use your right hand, and you grab your left hand with your right hand, you know, either at the wrist or at the forearm. Either way, there's flexibility along this line. And you take both of your hands and you place them on your body, either above your navel, below your navel, or on your chest. Okay, so there's flexibility as long as it's on your torso. You're not like on the side or backwards or something like that. All right, so there's a lot of flexibility in this. What is this stance? When you're standing like this and you got your hands like this, it's a stance of humility. It's a stance of humility. You're standing in front of Allah, and it's very common in a lot of cultures that when you're standing in front of someone like a dignitary or president that actually deserves some respect, or a king or something like that, then you kind of, many people like fold their hands kind of like this as a sign of, we're not just standing like this. We're actually standing like this. It's like a sign of humility, a stance of humility as a respect to the person in front of you. It's very, very common. It's a universal gesture. Except in America, it's not very common. So in places where like there's not really too much of a sense of honor or respect that's really built into the culture, they kind of lost that. But generally, it's a very universal stance. So it's quite well known to a lot of people. But the average American or Westerner, for example, would not even understand, well, I never realized that's kind of the wisdom behind it, because we don't do that anymore. But you look at people from other cultures, you find them when someone walks in, they kind of like always standing like this or standing like this with their hands folded in some way, shape, or form, Muslim or non-Muslim, and that's a sign of respect for people. So it's very similar to that. So once you're in prayer, your hands are folded, you're standing there, the first thing you recite is the opening supplication, which is the istiftah. Okay, and this is recommended, obviously. A little bit less slightly recommended, but it's still recommended. And that is, there's many of them. There's more than one, but this is one example. You say, Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik wa tabarakasmuk wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk. And I have in the notes for you the transliteration to pronounce it. And what that means is, it's glory to you, O Allah. May you be praised. Your name is blessed. Your greatness is exalted over all others, and no one is deserving of worship but you. Okay. So this starts your prayer in the beginning. This is how you introduce the prayer. After you make this opening supplication, you begin by seeking refuge in Allah, the ta'awudh, before you recite the Quran. And you say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Okay? And then this means I seek refuge in Allah from the cursed Satan. So before you recite Quran, this is what is recommended to say before you actually start reciting Quran. Then you begin by mentioning Allah's name, the Basmala. You say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which means in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. So you begin in the name of Allah. Now you recite Al-Fatiha, which is the first chapter, the first surah in the Quran, reciting the first chapter. And it's always recommended to recite in a melodious voice. So you try to recite in a very nice voice whenever you're reciting Quran. After you've done and you've finished reciting Al-Fatiha, you say Ameen. And Ameen means accept this prayer. And if you want to connect it, you want to understand why you're saying Ameen, what prayer? When you actually recited Surah Fatiha, you actually made a prayer. And that is the prayer when you said Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. It actually means, oh Lord, guide us to the straight path. Right? So you're asking Allah, guide us to the right path, to the straight path. And then at the end, you're saying, Ameen, oh Allah, accept this prayer that we just made. The prayer that you're saying, God accept it, is we need to be guided to the straight path. So you say it every single day. Sometimes you may not realize it, but that's what you're asking Allah for. And you're adding emphasis by saying, Ameen, accept that prayer that we just made. Now the Quranic recitation follows, which is the qira'ah. You recite some verses of Quran after you recite the Fatiha. So what verses of Quran? You can recite anywhere you want from the Quran. You can recite an entire surah, an entire chapter, or you can just recite a few verses from any chapter you want. There's nothing specific that needs to be read, as long as it's a decent amount. You don't just recite like, one half of a verse or something. Qaf, Allahu Akbar. You're done. Something a little bit longer than that. No, like wal asr, and then all of a sudden you go in. Actually, I had a friend of mine did that one time. He did al-haqqa, mal-haqqa, wa ma adraka mal-haqqa, Allahu Akbar. He goes in the prayer. So, yeah, there's a recommendation that it's a minimum of 3, but it doesn't have to be 3. It can be one long one, and long is relative, right? So if it's a long one, it's like it lasts a little bit time, So give it like 10, 20, 30 seconds at least, something around there. Don't try to make it too short. But you can start in the middle of a surah if you want. You can start at the beginning. You don't have to finish the entire surah, just a few verses of prayer. But don't like skip. I'm going to hit that verse, and then I'm going to hit up the other verse, and then go backwards to the other verse. Just do a section of the Quran. And then once you're done, you're going to go into bowing position, which is ruku' position. So what you're going to do is, you're in the middle of prayer, you're standing, you've done your recitation, you did your Fatiha, you said Ameen, you recited the verses. What comes next? Now you're going to go into bowing. So what you do is, you're going to say Allahu Akbar, say the takbir, while you're bending down. And you bend down all the way, and you go into bowing position, you're going to grab your knees. Right? So you go down, and you actually grab your knees. And while you're grabbing your knees, you make sure that your fingers are slightly, so imagine this is your knee, okay? Your fingers are slightly spread out, okay? Fingers are a little bit spread out, and you're actually grabbing your knees. This actually helps you to get support on the knees. Otherwise, if you're stuck like this, your hands can slide. And your eyes should be focused in the region of kind of where your feet are. All right, so now you're not looking at the place of your prostration anymore. Otherwise, your head would be sticking up a little bit. So it's just where you're kind of like your feet are, this area. And then you try to keep your back straight as much as possible. So try to actually have this 90-degree angle as much as possible, as close as you can get to a 90-degree angle. So don't be some people don't bend too much. They like bend like this much. If you have a knee problem, it's different. But if you can bend down, you need to bend down more. Some people are too flexible, and they bend down like all the way like this. Don't bend down too much either. That's why your hands on your knees gives you a perfect, almost 90-degree position. If you have your arms straight out, locked, the knees on the fingers, your back is kind of stretched out, such that the Prophet actually mentioned something, is that if you were to have a cup of water, and we put it on your back, a cup of water would be fine. It wouldn't be dripping, it wouldn't be falling. That's a good test. And don't go around testing people when in the middle of prayer. But you can test yourself to see if you're doing it correctly. Yeah, you gotta put your Starbucks on top of Thank you very much. Yeah. So that's the way it should be, 90 degrees, right? So once you're down in that position, think about what that position signifies. When you bow down, it's a humbling stance. It's a very humbling stance. It's like, for example, when people in martial arts, when they're about to spar or they're about to, get into a fight, they start bowing. So the bowing represents a sign of respect and dignity. And usually they don't bow too much. Going further down is a sign of more humility and respect. And this is exactly what you're doing when you're actually praying in front of Allah. So you're in bowing position. You say 3 times, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. 3 times, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, which means glory be to my Lord the Great. Right? And it's interesting that you're actually saying this while you're in the bowing position. So you're glorifying Allah, and at the same time you're doing what to yourself? You're humbling yourself. So you're down, you're humbling yourself, and you're glorifying Allah. That's the best way to do it simultaneously. And then once you're done with that position, you're about to stand back up. You go back to standing position with your arms to your sides like you had in the beginning before you started prayer. And while you're getting up, you say, Sami' Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana lakal hamd. Or Rabbana wa lakal hamd. Both are fine. Which means Allah has heard the one who praised him, or Lord, you are praised. So basically what you're saying is you're in the middle, you're in bowing position here, right? And then once you're all the way down, you're coming up, you're saying Sami' Allahu liman hamida, and once you're standing up straight, you say Rabbana lakal hamd, once you're in the standing position. And think about what you're saying now. So Allah has heard the one who praised him. So who just praised him? You did. In which position? In the bowing, you just praised Allah. You just said, glory be to my Lord, the Great. So you just praised Allah. So now when you stood up, what are you actually saying when you say, Sami Allahu liman hamida? You're saying that Allah has heard the one who just praised him. Meaning, I know that Allah has heard me. You're actually speaking to Allah, but you're just using the third person. You're saying, oh Allah, I know that you heard what I just said to you in my praise of you. Right? And then when you say, Rabbana lakal hamd, our Lord, you be praised. So you praise him again. So you say, we know that you just heard the praise that we just made, and we're going to praise you again one more time. It's exactly what you're saying. Many people have not reflected on this. Right? Now it kind of makes more sense. Right? Many people who've studied all Islamic law for 5 or 10 years, they still have not reflected on this. It's a very, very important point to reflect on. Helps you in your prayer when you understand what's going on. So then you're in standing position now, arms to the sides. Now you're about to go into prostration, what's known as sajda or sujud. So you go down all the way into prostration while saying Allahu Akbar again for the transition. And you get down on the floor while you're moving towards and saying the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar. Now how do you do this? There's 2 ways to do it. Either you can bend your knees and put your knees down on the floor first, and then move yourself all the way down to the ground. Or you can bend your knees down a little bit and get on your hands first before your knees. It doesn't make a difference. Both of them are fine. So what you do is you're going to bend down, you're saying Allahu Akbar, and you're going to go into prostration. So what do? The way that you do it is, number 1, you're going to put your forehead and your nose on the ground, okay, completely on the ground, in between your hands. Okay, so you got your forehead and your nose, and they're in between your hands. So your hands are not all the way out like this, and they're not all the way in like this. Your hands are actually in between, almost like when you started the prayer like this. It's almost in between like this. Okay, so that's where your hands are going to be. What else? Make sure that your fingers are together. Your fingers are not supposed to be spread out now, because you're not grabbing your knees, you're not grabbing the floor. So they're together. And your fingers are forward. So they're forward like this. They're not sideways or something like that. What else? Make sure that your elbows are actually off the ground. So your elbows should not actually be on the ground. Your elbows are off the ground. And that the elbows are away from your sides. So you're not tucked all the way in. Your elbows are a little bit away from your sides. Now don't overdo it when you're praying in a group. If you overdo it, what happens? There's no space for the other guy, and he ends up getting stuck like this. And it's very annoying, and it's very problematic. So don't do that. And at the same time, when you're praying alone, just keep it, keep it good balance. And some scholars say that the women, in order to be more concealed, should keep it in and keep their actually hands down. And they can do that. It's not a big deal if they do, but it's not, it's not really required. Also, keep some space between your stomach and your thighs. So you're not supposed to be, if you know yoga, there's something called child's pose, right? It's not child's pose. Okay, so child's pose is you're bending down and your stomach is basically on your thighs. So it's not that position. it's more, your body is spread out a little bit more, you're a little bit more forward when you're doing the actual thing, so that there's a little bit space between here. So much so that, like, imagine like a little baby's crawling, the little baby could actually walk underneath you, and you could make it the other way. That's not the purpose behind it, but it could if it needed to, right? So keep some space there. The bottom, it would be okay if the women conceal up a little bit more, especially if there's men present, then yeah, definitely. The bottom of your toes should be on the floor when you're in prostration, so your feet don't stick up from the back, right? Your bottom of your toes are on the floor, and they're facing forward, so your toes, I can't get my foot up here, but your toes are, you're down, and your toes are facing forward, but your feet are actually sticking up. So your whole foot is not on the floor, but your toe is up. Like that. There's pictures in the book. If you look at the book, if you bought the book. If you didn't buy the book, there's no pictures for you. So you can ask someone to check the pictures on their book. I did demonstration last time because we had a table here, so I could actually get my foot up here. This would be a little bit tough, I think. I got to stretch a little bit more beforehand. So you got your feet out like this. The bottom of your toes are facing forward. The rest of your feet are off the ground. That's pretty much what it is. And this stance this prostration is the most humbling stance you could possibly get. If you think about it, that your face generally represents your honor. And this is like a universal culture. Your face represents your honor. So much so that, those bullies in school and stuff like that, or your friends who they think you're your friends, they punch you in the arm, and they're hitting you in the back and all of that. If one of them comes and just slaps you on the face, even though the pain from the punch was more than the pain from the slap, right? This is probably only American culture. This happens, your friends do this to you, right, in high school. The pain from the slap is a lot less, but it's bothersome. It's more insulting than even the person who is causing you more pain. So it's considered your honor. Someone is messing with your honor when they actually hit you in the face or they slap you in the face. So what you're doing in prostration is you're taking the most honored part of your body that represents your honor, and you're putting it all the way down on the ground, on the floor, in front of Allah, to show your humility in front of Allah. This is the greatest and most humbling stance that you could possibly be in. And it's interesting that when you're in this humbling stance, what are you saying? 3 times, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. Which means, glory be to my Lord, the highest, the most high. And what position are you in? You're in the absolute lowest position that you can possibly get into. So this shows you your status, and then status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then there is intermediate sitting position, which is known as the qa'dah. Right? So once you're finished with your prostration, you're gonna get up while saying Allahu Akbar, and you're gonna sit actually. So now while you're sitting, you're gonna do a number of things. First, you're gonna take your palms and you're gonna put them on your thighs near your knees. So imagine if this is your leg, okay? You're gonna put your hand like right here. It's not over the knee, you're not grabbing the knee, just over the knee like this. It's not all the way up here or something. This is your leg, this will be your hand. And you rest both hands right there. If this is your knees, you're gonna rest it right there, okay? And your fingers are kind of facing a little bit forward. Then you keep your fingers together in this position because you're not grabbing anything again. Your eyes should actually be directed around where your knees are, this area. So you're not looking all the way forward, but you're looking around where where your hands are. If you're able to do this, you're supposed to sit in a certain way, which the Prophet actually taught us. And that is, you sit on your left foot, actually. So what you're doing is, you actually take your left foot, imagine this is your foot, this is the top of your foot, where you wipe your socks, right? It's the top of your foot. You basically put this part of the foot, your left foot, on the ground like this, and you take your left buttock, and you actually sit on this part of your foot, okay? And most of your weight is going to be here, okay? That's with your left foot. And then you take your right foot, and you keep it elevated like you had when you were in prostration. You keep the toes on the ground, right? Slightly outside, not underneath your right buttock. Slightly outside to the right, a little bit sticking out to the right, and you keep your toes facing forward. The rest of the foot is off the ground. Okay? And if you look, there's like a detailed zoomed in picture in the book of exactly how this is supposed to look. Right? From the rear, there's a rear position of the camera. It's got it recorded. Okay? And that's how it's gonna look. So that's what you're doing, and this is supposed to be a very comfortable position. Now I'm gonna tell you honestly, um, it's all about balance. Right? If you've never sat like this before, it's gonna feel like your toes gonna break off the first time if you don't know how to balance it. It took me 6 months because I didn't have a training, I didn't have a teacher or something. You got to figure it out. So it literally feels like your toe is gonna break. You're not supposed to break your toes. Okay, that's not the point. If you're in pain and you're struggling, it just means it's not about flexibility of your toes. It's not gonna get all of a sudden better where your toes are now flexible and all of a sudden the pain goes away. It's all about balance. So you're not balancing yourself correctly, it's gonna be painful. So what can you do? Initially, just don't stand like that. Just put your foot flat like this and stay on the left buttock position for a while, right? Until you start learning how to balance yourself properly in that position. Just watch other people who can do it, and you kind of watch how they're not going to be able to explain it to you, but you kind of watch them. You get a point of how this is actually done, right? So it's actually a very comfortable position. You could sit like that. You should be able to sit like that for a very long time. The point is not to pain you. And I know many people, they feel like pain when they're in this position. It's not supposed to be a painful position. It's supposed to be a very relaxing, calm, comfortable position. So if you know how to do it, it's comfortable. If you don't know how to do it, it can be very painful. You learn how to do it. Otherwise, in the meantime, you just sit in a position anyway which is going to be comfortable so that you can focus on your prayer. Okay? What is this designed to do in the first place, this intermediate sitting position? It's designed to give you a little bit of a break before you go into the second prostration again, before you go into the second sajda. So you're just kind of putting a step in between the two sajdas so that you can go and start focusing on the second sajda now again. Okay? Then once you're done with this, and there's a supplication you could actually make in this one as well. We won't learn it in this class, but you can something you can add in this class as well, in this section as well. And then you're going to go into prostration again for the second time. You say Allahu Akbar, you go into the second prostration, you say exactly what you said before. Same thing, same procedure, same form, same everything. Okay? Once you're done with that, and you're finished with the second sajda, you're gonna stand up all the way for the second unit of prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, and you're gonna stand up and get back into standing position with your right arm over your left, hands folded, and you're back up to standing position. You just completed one unit of prayer. Now we're gonna talk about the second unit of prayer. This is the first unit of prayer, and the first part is done. So I think it's a good time to take a break now, right now. Agreed? So it's 11:44. Come back at noon. High noon or 12 noon? 12 noon, inshallah. We'll be back, inshallah. Make sure to write down your questions as well. Assalamu alaikum. You can check out this makeqr.com. It's legal.
Is that on your let me go ahead and take a look at it. Email you notification.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we left off at second unit, right? So now that you're stood up, you're in the second unit of prayer, hands are still folded. What you're going to do is you're going to do everything that you did previously except two things. You're going to skip the opening supplication. So you're not going to say Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. You're not going to start with that. And you're going to skip the seeking refuge. You're not going to say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, because you already said it once, and you only need to say it once when you're reciting Quran. So you're going to recite Quran again, you don't need to say it a second time. So you skip those first two things, and you do everything else. So you say the Fatiha, you say the first chapter of the Quran. Then you say the Ameen. Then you recite the Quran. Then you go into bowing. Then you come back up. Then you go back into prostration. Come back up. Back into second prostration. Now that you're at the second prostration, in the second unit of prayer, you're going to say Allahu Akbar, and you're going to come and sit back up, and you're going to stay seated now. Just the same position that you were when you were in between the two sajdas. Same sitting, same style, same foot, same everything. Hands still right there at the same place. Now while you're sitting, you're going to say something else. Okay, this is known as the sitting position, the qa'da position. You're going to be saying, first of all, the salutations, which is this long phrase here, which is At-tahiyyatu lillahi was-salawatu wat-tayyibatu. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi as-salihin. Which is greetings, prayers, and all pure things ultimately belong to Allah. May the peace of Allah be with you, O Prophet, as well as Allah's mercy and blessings. May the peace of Allah be with us and with all of Allah's righteous servants. So if you want an analysis of this, check the How to Pray book, the How to Pray book that I recommended for you. It's a whole analysis of the meaning behind this and what this is supposed to represent. After you've said this, you do the declaration of faith, which is the tashahhud. The tashahhud is what you do is when your hands are on your thighs, near the knees, right? You're going to make a fist with your right hand, and you're going to point forward with your index finger. Right? And while you're doing this, you're going to say the tashahhud, which is Ashhadu wa la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Very similar to what you did we learned in the last chapter. When do you say this? After wudu. Exactly. After you perform your wudu. So this is the declaration of faith, and the translation is there. Right? You point your finger. After you're done with that, remember this is a 2-unit prayer. So now you're going to be concluding the prayer. So what you're going to do is you're going to say the blessings, the salawat on the Prophet. So you're going to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. So, O Allah, bless Muhammad and his family, just as you have blessed Ibrahim and his family. You are praiseworthy and glorious. O Allah, favor Muhammad and his family just as you have favored Ibrahim and his family. You are the praiseworthy and glorious. So you say this entire thing at the end. And now right before you finish your prayer, it's optional. If you want to put in a supplication here, some type of dua or something in Arabic, you can just throw this in. If you want to memorize some of the supplications that the Prophet used to say, you can throw that in at this point in time. And then you're going to finish the prayer by saying the salam, the greetings. So what you're going to do is you're going to move your head to the right, and you're going to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You're going to move your head to the left, say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And what you're actually doing is you're praying to the people, you're giving the greetings of peace to the people around you. Because you're moving your head and you're saying it. So all the people this side, all the people the other side, as well as the angels and whoever else is there. So you're saying greetings basically to everyone. Everyone who's around here, they receive the greetings of peace and mercy. So when you're praying alone, so this is it. Prayer is finished. That's the conclusion of how a 2-unit prayer is going to be prayed. Now when you're praying alone, it's recommended that you whisper everything while moving your lips loud enough so that you can at least hear yourself when you're in the prayer. So you're going to be saying even the prayer, Alhamdulillah, just so you can hear yourself. That's recommended. Otherwise, if you don't move your lips, you're just saying it in your mind, you can go ahead and that counts. That's going to be fine. But guess which one is going to be better? And guess why it's better if you say it a little bit, you move your lips a little bit. Especially if you're like Speedy Gonzalez mode, if your prayer, you're going really, really fast, try to do the same speed while actually moving your lips. You'll realize that your mind goes faster than your lips could even possibly move. So you're forced to slow yourself down when you start moving your lips. So you're going to slow down. Okay? And that's going to help you as well. And helps with the concentration as well. So that's the 2-unit prayer. So how do you do a 3-unit prayer? All you're going to do is you're going to add 1 extra unit after you do the declaration of faith. So the same thing you did. You start with the prayer, you do the recitation of Quran, you do the bowing, you do the prostration, get back up for the 2nd unit, you do the recitation, do the bowing, do everything. When you're in sitting position, you say the salawat, right? You say the you say the salawat, and then you say the tashahhud. No, sorry, not the salawat, the tahiyyat. At-tahiyyatu lillahi. Then you say the declaration of faith. You point with your finger, say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, right? Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Once you're done with that, now you're going to get up for the 3rd unit of prayer. So instead of continuing on to saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, you're going to say Allahu Akbar, and you're going to stand up again for the 3rd unit of prayer. Now the 3rd unit of prayer is almost like the other 2 units that you prayed, with the exception of you're standing up, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to skip the opening supplication. You're going to skip, what else are you going to skip? Seeking refuge in Allah. You're going to skip A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim. You're going to say the Fatiha, but this time you're not going to recite any other verses of Quran after the Fatiha. You're going to say Ameen, and you're done. Now you're going to go into bowing position. So you're going to say Allahu Akbar, you go into bowing position like normal, get back up from bowing, go into prostration, get back up, go into prostration, get back up, and this time you sit and you conclude your final unit, your final sitting is exactly the same way as the 2nd unit's final sitting was. You say everything again from the beginning. At-tahiyyatu lillahi, finish that. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, finish that. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, finish that. And then you do your salams, complete your prayer. A 4-unit prayer is very, very similar to that, except you take a 2-unit prayer and you add 2 of those intermediary units first. So what you do is, after you finish 2, you stand up, you do just like you did in the 3rd one, but when you come up, you don't sit. You stand up all the way, and you do exactly what you did for the 3rd unit. So in the 3rd unit, you recited Fatiha, you said Ameen, and then what did you say after you said Ameen? Allahu Akbar. You're done, and you go into bowing position. So in the 4th unit. You do that, you do exactly the same thing until you're sitting, and then you go ahead and you conclude the prayer. So remember, the way to understand it is basically, the first 2 units of prayer have Fatiha and more verses of Quran being recited. The second 2 units of prayer, the 3rd and the 4th units of prayer have only Fatiha and Ameen, no other recitation of Quran. That's a very simple way to remember it. And the other thing to remember is that when you're praying a 2-unit prayer, the final sitting is in the 2nd unit, right? The final sitting has 3 components. At-tahiyyat, the shahada, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and the Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, the salawat. 3 components in the final sitting. If you're praying a 3-unit prayer, the first time you sit after the 2nd unit, it's not a final sitting. It's a intermediate sitting kind of. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut out the last part. You're going to cut out the Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. In a 4-unit prayer, there's going to be 2 sittings as well. The first one is after the 2 units, and the final one is after all 4 units. You're going to sit down, you're going to conclude your prayer like that. So that's pretty much the way it's going to be. And when you go back and you look at it, you try and practice it and everything, it's going to be very clear for you, inshallah. So that's the 4-unit prayer. And that's where we stop for today, actually. So that's it. Any questions? Yes. East of northeast? No, it's north of northeast. Here in Southern California, it's north of northeast. Yeah, you can check the compass again. If you go to my book, Welcome to Islam, and you find whatever website I put in there, I can't remember what it is now. You got it on you? Yeah. Oh yeah, just check it. Check the website that tells you. Find the website if you can. Go on that thing. It's like qiblalocator.com or something like that. It shows you the exact line based upon the location you type in there, and it shows you the line, and the line is like this, which shows you it's closer to north. Okay. Yes. We've not learned nafil yet. So only things that we've learned so far. We only learned the 5 daily prayers, the minimum ones. The fard, we've only learned the fard. I know, I'm saying to leave it for the next time after we cover it. Yeah, after we cover it, then we'll take those questions. So, yes.
On the sitting.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Sitting position.
Is there any other significance behind the posture itself?
But the posture is pretty much one of comfort, and this is the way the Prophet did it. So this is the reason behind it.
I was just thinking maybe we have the toes pointing towards the Qibla.
Yeah, so it could be that the toes are being pointed towards the Qibla or something. There could be some, hidden significance, but it's not clear cut. We can try and figure out, extrapolate what it might have meant, but it's not so clear to figure out exactly what it is. Yeah. Yes. We're going to talk about the haram time afterwards. We're getting next week, inshallah. We'll cover that. Yes. So if you only do Fatiha, you don't know the other recitation of the Quran, you check the How to Pray book, and it tells you what to say as a substitute for it. And it's very, very short. You could just say Subhanallah, and it counts as a substitute for you, and it counts, so you don't need to do anything else. You shouldn't say it in English in the prayer. It's better not to say it in English. Just try and memorize it with the English meaning while you're going on. Whatever you can, even if you don't know the Fatiha and you haven't memorized the Fatiha yet, right? You can just say Subhanallah. Say it 3 times, which is very, very easy to memorize, very easy to understand the meaning, and you do that until you've memorized the Fatiha. The which one? The Shahada?
No.
Oh, at the end. Yeah. Exactly. So what you do in the meantime, you do the same thing. So do you have the How to Pray book? You don't have it? I will get you a copy today. So just see Brother Shahab, he'll get you a copy. And it'll explain to you exactly what you do. In the meantime, you need 2? You have one or no? You have one? Yeah, she's got hers. So yeah. Anyone else need it who doesn't have it? Who's a new Muslim? Okay, so we'll get one for you, inshallah. Just make sure to see him before you leave. Yeah, so it explains to you. You can substitute if you don't know it right now. And there's many Muslims also who don't know it, who haven't memorized it. If you don't know it, you just say Subhanallah 3 times as a substitute in the meantime while you're memorizing it. And within a week, a month, at least 6 months, you should have it down. I think 6 months is a good cutoff point where you could learn it in 6 months. You do 1 letter per day, and you'll get it in 6 months, guaranteed. Okay. All right. Yeah.
I've heard that when making drawings, it's recommended to make drawings separate than prayers.
Yeah, that's correct. It's recommended to do it in the Sunnah prayers rather than the fard prayers.
Because the congregation might be off time.
That's part of the reason. Even if you can go ahead and make extra dua while you're in that position, but it should not. The real difference is as long as it's in Arabic, that's going to be fine. If it's not in Arabic, then it's another issue. All right. So there's two main places. There's one main place for dua that's right before the salam, right? If you finish your prayer and you go into sajda, and go into prostration, then making the dua in supplications in that time is fine in any language, however you want. If you're just in that position. If you want to do it only in sajda position, the best time is outside of prayer, because you could do it outside of prayer, and if you want to do it in your own language, you could do it in your own language outside of prayer. Yeah.
When
If you're waiting for the imam,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll cover it next week, inshallah. We'll cover it next week. Yes.
On the timing of the prayer, do you hold a window of time between it, let's say it's 10 minutes before, Oscar comes up?
Mm.
Okay. Do you have, how much time do you have for the next prayer? Is it 1 minute before, 2 minutes before that you can start it?
Okay. Yeah, so how much time do you have to start the prayer if you delayed until the end of time? It's so that you get the entire prayer in before the time goes. So you just calculate how much time you'd probably take to pray, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, and you have to get in that spot. Doesn't mean that if you're gonna miss it, that you shouldn't pray. But you're not gonna get the same, your prayer doesn't count as being in the proper time.
But you don't want to look like you're in fast forward.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Get it in.
That's true. So you shouldn't delay. Just try not to delay more than 5 minutes till the end of time, so that you get it in there. Yeah, that's the key. We'll cover it next week, inshallah. That's fine, but I mean, now you should say it though, because you're reciting Quran. You should say it. Inshallah. Yes. So no. When you start the second surah, when you start the second surah, if you say Bismillah or you don't say Bismillah, there's a difference of opinion. So either way, it's fine. It's fine. We're gonna learn that next week, inshallah. Yes, next week. Any other questions from this week? Yeah.
You have kids running around and what they run in front of you.
Yes.
I've seen some people like have that.
So if you have someone running around in the prayer and they're going to be coming in your prayer direction, which you've marked off, if they're kids, stopping them, you can stop them if they can understand what you're doing. Otherwise, they're just going to come in your way again. If there's adults, right, you can actually put your hand out and stop them from coming in front of you, right? Just do it in a gentle way. Yeah. Some people go really hard.
Yeah.
Knock the guy out. Yeah. Just don't slap the other guy. Just stop him from getting in your way. That's it.
Is that because they're, what, is it insult to do that?
Yeah. So the reasoning is no one's supposed to walk in front of you, and that's because technically you're praying to Allah, right? So this is your space. If someone came and threw some statue or something in front of you, it kind of gives you the representation. Someone's in your way of you praying directly to Allah. So no one should be in your space.
So it's actually that there's a previous obstacle to
Exactly.
get to that.
Exactly. That's why you can stop them, and no one should be walking in front of another person while they're praying directly in front of their prayer place.
How can you avoid that? Maybe in the past, I'm kind of like trying to interrupt, but I gotta go.
Yeah. So if you have to go, and there's no space, there's no way to get around, this exception to the rule. So you don't do it whenever you are able to wait or something like that. But if it's really crowded and you need to get out, you get out.
Because I don't want to be like a beeline straight across it.
Yeah.
The men's area to get,
Yeah. In that case, you can do that. Yes, in that case you can do it. And also to answer your question, when you're in like a crowded area, it's like a mosque and people need to get out, then you don't start stopping them. Because if the guy's like, his car is getting towed and you're like, you keep stopping him, you're like, I need to get to my car. So yeah, you don't stop him. Yeah, so we talked about that already. That's the beginning. When you start the prayer, you mark your spot. But if there's no space, sometimes you have no choice but to go in front of someone. There's no other way to get out, basically. So what the mosque should actually do is establish, and I'm working on this, establish these aisles, right, in the middle. So like you have like 2 aisles in the prayer area. As soon as the prayer is done, when people are going to do other prayers, no one prays in the aisle. Everyone who needs to get out, just get straight to the aisle, and now you're clear. You can get yourself out of there. So that's coming soon. Probably the first mosque to implement it in the world, right? Except Makkah. Makkah has it, obviously. Yeah. How to pray is available for sale at the office, but you can ask Brother Shahab. It's also available online for free. If you go to my website, mustafaumar.com, you can just read it online for free as well. It's like one of those books that's meant for everyone. But the physical copy is always better to have. It's cleaner, it's nicer to hold and everything, you know. Okay, alhamdulillah. Yes. Praying on the road, that's dangerous. On the side of the road. As long as the place is clean and safe, it's perfectly fine. Remember, we define cleanliness as you don't see any visible signs of impurity or anything. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine. You can pray anywhere. You know, where did the companions and the Prophet pray when they were traveling to the desert? Prayed on the ground. All right, so there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But we haven't covered that yet. So next week, inshallah.
So you cover the significance of Ashura as far as the most important because
Ashura?
Huh?
No, we didn't cover it yet. We'll cover it later.
And then
Inshallah. In probably week 7 or 8, when we cover fasting.
what if I can't wait?
You can wait, inshallah. Inshallah. Since we're not there right now, you can wait, inshallah. If we were there, I would tell you. Yes, inshallah. All right, yes. Okay, bismillah. No sunnah questions. Oh, okay. We will cover it next week. We will. You can actually say out loud subhanallah to get their attention. So if someone's knocking on your door and you're inside praying, or you need to alert someone about something, you can actually make a remembrance of Allah, which is considered to be part of the prayer, to alert them. Hopefully they get the point. You can't tell them, like, be quiet. You know, so you can actually say out loud, you can say subhanallah, and they're supposed to get the point. And if they don't know, because they didn't take a CIS class, at least if someone says subhanallah to you, you know what they're saying. So they're telling you to be quiet. So yeah, that's Allah. It's recommended to whisper. Otherwise, you could pray in your mind as well. Like out loud? Loud? No, you shouldn't be doing it loud, unless it's a loud prayer. You know? Yeah. Okay.
Are we going to be covering the reasons why prayers are silent rather than...
Yeah, we'll cover. We'll cover. We haven't talked about audible yet, so we'll cover. We'll cover. Yeah, inshallah. Anything else from today? Direction, qibla, compass, calculations, everything's... Well, here we go. Okay, there we go. From right here, from one of these 4 things. Yes, auntie? Okay, so when you're in bowing or prostration, can you say it more than 3 times? You can say it more than 3 times, but it should be an odd number. So you can do 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, you can keep on going. You can go as more than 3 times. Yeah. Okay, so when you're praying home, when you're not supposed to recite loud, which we'll cover next week, can you pray loudly? No, you shouldn't be praying loudly. When you're not supposed to pray loudly in a group, you're not supposed to pray loudly alone either. The recitation part. Yeah, no, you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, the saying the Allahu Akbar part is fine, but it's just not recommended. You should not be doing that. So, let's see. Yes. We're going to cover that as well. We'll cover women leading prayer. Yes.
When you get into that purification part, okay, is toothbrush that the Prophet used, this one, this one,
Mm-hmm.
basically it's like it's not required, I don't recommend it, or it's optional to use.
Mm.
And that if they use it, it's just like help with the prayer. I don't.
So the brushing your teeth for the prayer and for the wudu is recommended. Now it's brushing your teeth with anything. Okay, using the miswak is probably one of the best ways to brush your teeth. Actually, it's more purifying. It has better for the enamel on your teeth and all of that. So there's a lot of benefits for the miswak itself. But whatever you use still fulfills the purpose of doing the brushing.
Okay, so there's no, like, extra brownie points to use this.
Not necessarily. There's a difference of some scholars may say that because it kind of brings you back to how the Prophet used to do things. But as long as it's achieving the same thing, with the purpose is cleaning. The purpose is cleaning. So if you're using a normal toothbrush, it still fulfills the purpose. But it's probably good to try and use it at least sometimes. All right, so you could get one of those in the local places. You can go online if you want one with the cover, because usually a cover is a big problem, right? Because it comes in a plastic cover, and where do you keep it? It gets in your pocket, it gets dirty and all of that, right? So there's this really cool company that actually made a cover with the miswak. It's called calicufis.com. Sold out? Oh, you sold out? Okay, never mind. It's sold out. So they made it once. It was a great idea. I guess it's sold out. So yes, well, maybe not millions, but it's pretty good. You had a question? Yes. Yes.
Big deal about it. It's going in the wrong direction. It's the last time accepted. My understanding is long term, yeah, it's correct. Like, there may be times when we're not sure where the Qibla is and the earth is round. Okay? And then the second one is what if you find, the second part is what if you find something that is not, and you realize your friend is in the direction of the Qibla and what their presence and why.
So technically the Qibla should be the shortest distance between you and Mecca. Right? If you were to take the longest distance, you could actually turn around and you would actually have your back towards the Qibla if you're going around the other side of the world. Right? So around the other side of the earth. So it's actually quite problematic to take a direction which is longer. Right? Because technically you could actually be at the Kaaba, and if you turn your back towards the Kaaba, you say, well, technically I'm facing the other side of the Kaaba. Just going around the entire earth and I'm facing the other side. And that's not something that generally should be acceptable. Right? That should not be acceptable. So there are some people who really insist on this traditional way of calculating the Qibla and all of that. We hope that their prayers are also accepted, inshallah. If they have the right intentions or they're confused, they just don't understand what's going on, they don't understand, that how the earth is round and how the shortest distance and all of that is. So the question is, will their prayer be accepted? It depends on two things. It depends on, one, their knowledge, and two, their intention. If they have proper knowledge yet they insist on being on this direction, then perhaps Allah knows best, they might be held accountable for that. If someone is just, they don't know, right, and they just assume the best and they say, well, this is what people are doing, it probably seems like it must be the right Qibla, otherwise people wouldn't be doing it. If they have a right intention, inshallah, Allah is not going to hold them accountable for that. If you're in a congregation with them and you know that they're facing this Qibla and they're doing it intentionally or something like that, because it's pretty clear cut now, I would recommend that you repeat your prayer. I would recommend that you repeat it. It's quite problematic unless there's some real strong basis. And I've read quite a few books on it. There's a really good book you can read on it. It's called Port in a Storm by New Hamim Keller. He's written an entire book on just this Qibla issue. And it's a very, very good book, actually, and explains quite a bit. Port in a Storm. Port in a Storm. Yeah. Hard to find now, but it used to be quite common. Yes. Repeat Surah Fatiha for what reason? Because you weren't concentrating, or just for the heck of it? Yeah, if you weren't concentrating or something like that, you can always go back and repeat what you were saying in the prayer. If there's no reason for it at all, then it's probably best not to repeat the same thing. Yeah.
Based on that repetition. So the second surah that you read after the Ramadan, you guys read, so don't you read the same surah both the first time?
Okay, is it okay to read the same verses or the same surah in the first and the second unit? Yes, it's okay. It's okay. Shouldn't make it a practice though, but it's okay. Yeah, everyone's gonna start saying, "Okay, man, that's it." Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar in all of them. No, that should not be the shortest surahs. Yeah. There are different opinions on the pointing of the finger. Yes. So most of them are acceptable. So either way, if you point your finger earlier, if you point it later, if you move your finger, if you move it in a direction or something like that, there's all these different opinions on how you point your finger. But is the clear-cut thing is you're pointing the index finger. You're not pointing your middle finger. You're not pointing your pinky. You're not pointing your left hand. You're not pointing anything else. As long as you're kind of clear that what you're pointing and where you're pointing, and you're not pointing up, you're not pointing sideways. So the difference of opinion is actually very, very small. What's unanimous is it's the index finger, you're pointing straight forward, and whether there's some motion or not motion is very, very minor thing.
But I've heard some, like, say as soon as you say it,
All the way up?
not all the way, but like this.
Perhaps maybe there's some opinion about a little bit higher, but not too high. So yeah. There's some difference of interpretation, of understanding of how you move your finger, but it's so minor, it's so tiny thing about pointing as long as you're pointing your finger, that's what's important, right? People make really a big like mountain out of this thing, so just be careful, be cautious, don't grab anyone else's finger when you're in the middle of prayer or something like that. I've actually seen it, we were just talking about it, I've actually seen it, someone actually goes and grabs another person's finger because they think they're pointing the wrong way. Don't do any of these things. Okay, there's acceptability. If you see the guy like pointing his finger like this, then yeah, you can just put his hand back down. But otherwise, no. If he was pointing the left finger or something, you can let him know it should be the right finger or something. Okay. Yeah.
So how are we supposed to know when Dhuhr ends?
When Zohar ends, you take the easiest way is to check a calendar, right? But if you want to do it manually, take an object. Check the shadow of the object, right? And when the object shadow actually equals the actual length of the object, that's when you're hitting about Zohar time, and then you check the little shadow at noon, which is very, very small. Very, very small. So this is for the ending of Zohar prayer.
So it's supposed to be
When the object shadow equals itself. Two shadow lengths? Yeah, that's the Hanafi school. That's not really the Hanafi school, it's Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. And his students, almost all his students, differed with him, and they went with the other opinion. Instead of two, some say two shadow lengths, the other his students and the majority of scholars, they went with one shadow length. So that's the thing. Port in a storm, Nuh Keller. The calendar that we use now, I believe we recently changed to North American calendar. It's called ISNA calendar, but it's actually North American calendar. ISNA had nothing to do with it, and they disavowed themselves that we had nothing to do with it. So, because all the other calendars use 18 degrees, 19 degrees, 19.5 degrees. Now that we checked in the summer, for sure, for Ramadan, we use the 15 degree calendar. 15 degrees for Fajr, 15 degrees for Isha, which is North American calculation. So if you look on your app and you go to settings, you see all these different calculation methods. One of them is North America. One of them is Muslim World League. One of them is University of Islamic Sciences, Karachi. One of them is Egyptian Muslim General Authority, something like that. And there's some other ones, al-Qura in Mecca and all of that. So we go with that one because that happens to be in our region. But for the online students, if there's any online students, you have to check your own locality. So if you're in Canada, you might use a different degrees. Don't use the exact same calendar. Check your own degrees for your area. Okay. Yes. Okay, so once you're done with the tashahhud, when you're pointing your finger, do you put your finger back down or you don't? There's a difference of opinion. So if you leave it up, it's fine, and if you put it back down, it's also fine. It's not a, like, these are such little minor differences. Whichever one you do, it's not a big deal. Yes. Mm-mm. So when there's like a 3-minute difference in prayer schedules or something like that, that's because when you go across a few cities, the prayer time varies that many minutes. So they're giving you a different timing. So that's, you follow the one in which you are. So whichever city you're living in or whichever city you're praying in, you follow those prayer times. So the year-round calendar are the same. So you just make sure that you make sure that your local masjid was calculating properly from their own location. Some masjids don't know how to calculate properly, so they go on there and they put in Los Angeles, and they're actually in southern Orange County, but they just saw LA, so they clicked on it and they printed the calendar, and you're quite a few minutes off. So they should know kind of what they're doing. The reality is not everyone necessarily knows what they're doing. So if you know that they're doing it wrong, you figure out what's right, print your own calendar, and you follow that. If there's some difference of opinion, you're going to be praying there, you let them know, and you go ahead with, what seems to be okay there. Ideally, there should be an app which basically, when you open it, it tracks your current location. And I'm sure there's one of them. It gives you your automatic current location and gives you your precise coordinates for the prayer time. That's the best thing. So there should be an app out there. I haven't found it on iPhone, but if there's no app out there, here's a great opportunity for a computer programmer to do some service to the community.
There is an app out.
It's exactly, it relocates it every time you open it?
It does.
Excellent.
It does
The Adhan program. Okay, I have the same thing then. Okay, then it works.
That one does it, and the other one that has to play David right now to do it, if he wants to, is Fajr Alarm.
Fajr alarm. Yeah, it's also.
Believe me, it will wake you up.
That's Fajr alarm will.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I scare my roommates.
Yeah. So for Fajr, especially people who have a problem waking up, get one of those special alarms. There are several types of alarms that if you're a really deep sleeper, there are alarms where it's like a little helicopter flies away and you actually have to find it in the room somewhere and put it back in the alarm to turn it off. There's another one I got online. It's like a gun and a target comes up and you have to shoot the target 5 times in order to turn the alarm off. That really wakes you up. That one really, really wakes you up. So yeah.
For Maghrib, it's when the sun is completely out of sight, that's when it starts.
Maghrib, sun is completely out of sight. Yes. Sunset. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Okay, there's an app called Never Miss Fajr. Oh, nice. Before it turns off the alarm. Nice. That's very good. Yeah, my friend actually implemented that like 10 years ago. Basically, it gives you a phone call and it keeps on calling you until you solve this math problem. So it says like 7 times 9 plus 4 divided by 3. And you have to, like, once you think about it, you're awake. Your mind becomes awake and now you're good to go for the rest of the day. So these are all great apps, alhamdulillah. So you gotta be careful because some people outsmart the alarm, So they know how to put a pillow over it, or they know how to do something else with it, turn it off, or do something like that. So you gotta set it up in a way where you can't do anything else. So, alhamdulillah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, good question. So is there any school actually which says while you're reciting Quran and all of that, you actually leave your hands folded down? And there actually is. So there's a group of Maliki scholars, and among the Maliki school of thought, which actually says you keep your hands down. And there's difference within their own school, but there is a legitimate opinion like that. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But there's no one who says, you put your hands behind your back or on the side or something like that. Okay.
Surgery on torso or
Yeah, I recommend you don't do that because it's a very minority opinion. But most say on the torso. But there's a small group that actually does say hands down, and it's pretty valid opinion. Okay, so inshallah, make sure to do your homework. How's the homeworks going? Getting better? How are the quizzes? The exams? Yeah? Yes. Okay, good. So it's getting better. And remember, go back now and check your answers. Even though the correct answer is not given to you anymore, you can look at the wrong answer, just go back to the book and double check and make sure, well, you know, why did I get this wrong? Go back, double check, read very carefully, and when you figure out the right answer, it kind of sticks with you because you put some effort into it. So that's why we don't give you the right answer. So just try and check it, and if you absolutely cannot figure it out, you've researched, you've checked, you've done everything, and you're like, I just can't figure this out, just ask the beginning of class, next class, or you email me. Inshallah, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka Allah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.